Hey, everybody, and welcome to another session of Unfiltered. That's UNPHIL. You get the rest. My name is Philip Macca. Thanks for joining me. I want to talk today about writing. And for those of you who are aspiring writers, I want to share some things that I've learned in my writer's journey. I'm a twice published nonfiction author, been working on a novel for about 4 years. And I've got some takeaways that I hope will help you. So let's get started. Number one, and maybe the most important thing I can share, something I had to learn, is that there's no such thing as good writing. There's only good rewriting. And it's funny, the general public places like this mystique around writers, that we sit down inspired at the keyboard. We're like Yanni, right? And magic fairy dust and glitter fills the air around us as we type this story, and woodland creatures from miles around come to the window to admire us like they once admired Snow White. you know, I learned the hard way that it's not that way. And if you have that expectation, you can also have the expectation of writer's block. But I'll tell you what my first experiences were before I really embraced this. It's like I was putting on a football helmet and just running full speed into a wall many, many, many times over and over until I got dizzy. I was so dizzy I couldn't run anymore. And then I sit down in front of a blank screen that's blurry and wait for the perfect words to come out, which they don't. You know what? Puke it out. And it's a terrible way to say it. Get the words out of you. Get everything out of you. Treat it like a great big bucket of water that you shake up and throw across the sidewalk. Throw all the words you possibly can. Don't worry about typos. Don't worry about grammatical errors. Don't worry if the IDs are going to suck. Don't worry about anything. Just get it out, right? And once you've gotten it out, take a little break. Go take the samurai sword off your fireplace mantle, sharpen it up. Put on your best samurai outfit, including those weird toe things they wear, and become a word murderer. Because the magic happens in the rewrites. It's like I'm an amateur astronomer, right? So I have a telescope I bring outside. I've got a beautiful view of the sky at night, very little light pollution where I live. But I never expect to just plop down the telescope, put my eye in, and see the planet or constellation that I'm looking for. That's just not going to happen, right? We know you've got to turn this dial and make adjustments and all that. Writing's the same thing. And you know what? If you make yourself better and better at those lens adjustments, if you will, eventually the clarity of your message is going to come through, and it's a beautiful thing when it does. But if you expect it in draft one, put on your helmet. Number two, if you've seen the movie Field of Dreams, you know the reference I'm going to use. If you build it, they may not come when you're a writer. They may not come. I had the great honor, my second book called Make Others Greater, I had the great honor of telling a story of a very unique team of folks who made it to the base camp of Mount Everest. Now, look, Mount Everest is a tricky place, right? I mean, you've got high altitude cerebral edema to deal with, pulmonary edema to deal with. You've got avalanches, usually daily. You got to cross that Khumbu ice fall, which is constantly shifting. So the fact that this team accomplished what they did is truly miraculous. So I had the chance to tell a story about the largest team of persons with disabilities ever to reach the base camp of Mount Everest. And more than that, the expedition leader, one of my dear friends, Gary Geller, went on to summit Mount Everest, the first man in history missing an arm to summit Mount Everest. And I got to tell that story. Super cool, such an honor. So I went through the rewrites that we talked about earlier and brought in some professional help afterwards and, really fine-tuned, sculpt the message to the point where we both felt very, very good about it. And then we went to Amazon and published, right? And on the morning that we published, I was on a national radio show, 1.2 million listeners nationwide. And I literally went like this. I have arrived. And you know what? I sold 0 books that day. Obviously, I'm slightly disappointed. But the thing you have to know is that if you want to be an author, you need to relentlessly self-promote. Build your author's platform. I know that those words make you want to gag like you have a fur ball, but it's true. Do things, right? Just create content. Share videos of the kind of doing. Share your experience. Share your bad days, your good days. But more than that, you've got to market. You've got to get yourself out there. Gary and I have, taken to the stages all across America. Last December, I had the honor of speaking to over 2,000 folks in China and talking about the messages from the book. And you have to be prepared to do that, right? So if you build it, they may not come, but if you keep inviting and inviting, you'll get some traction. So then I decided to start work on my first attempt at a novel. And I actually said out loud, I'm going to write a best-selling book in 4 months. That was over 4 years ago. And so if you want to be a novel writer, the first thing you want to do is embrace your inner insomniac. What I found is that, I started getting into the novel, right? And after 8 months of research, man, I was just inspiring to sit down and hammer it out and get into this plot I developed in my twisted little mind. And I learned that creativity and inspiration are very jealous gods. They get especially jealous when your head hits the pillow. So expect to be, for me, whatever reason, it was 3:30 in the morning. I'd wake up with an idea, right? And then hammer it out, get back to bed maybe 5 or 5:30. When I finally got it all out of me, get back to bed at 5 or 5:30, wake up, do my normal thing. And eventually I'd get around to looking at what I wrote the night before. And usually I'd have a Dr. Phil moment with myself. What were you thinking? Because it usually wasn't that great. As I got further into the novel, what I experienced was my nights in Venice. You're probably wondering what that means. I was too when I came up with it. But if you've ever been to Venice, Italy, the locals will give you a map and say, yeah, you want to go to, I think it's St. Mark's Cathedral. You want to go there, just take these roads, right? But what these roads are is like an adult maze, like an 8-foot walled maze. And you're following exactly where you're supposed to until you hit a dead end. And that's how it goes. And that's how writing goes too. Directly what I mean is, I got 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the book, came up with some excellent ideas, and then realized for this to be true, what happened way back here could not have happened, So there's this constant retracing of steps that occurs, like that little Venice maze trip. So be expecting it, right? The next thing you really want to do, when I got to the end of draft number 1, my advice to you is find yourself a Dan. And here's what I mean. There's plenty of people out there. They're gonna, if you want to hire an editor, a storyline advisor, a combination of both. There's a lot of people in that space. They're going to say things like, "Oh, I love your story. I bought your vision. It's inspiring. It's amazing. The twists and turns are riveting." You don't want those people. You want a Dan. I'll tell you how the experience went with Dan. So I sent him my opening chapter after I decided to retain him, paid him a retainer fee, and said, "Give me your honest feedback." The 2-page Word document he sent back started with these exact words: "The story is there, the writing is not." And that was the kindest thing that was said. And look, it hurt. As writers, we are investing a portion of ourselves, and what we want is validation. We want somebody to say, "Wow, this is really, really cool." But if it's not, don't get someone to tell you that, right? Get the blunt truth. And in fact, being a writer is a journey that never ends. I don't think you ever master the craft. So get somebody that's going to be tough on you, right? I got my first compliment from Dan exactly, well, not exactly, but pretty close to 4 years after we started working together. And it was a short one. He said, great description. A couple months later, I got my next compliment. He said, this is the best scene of your entire manuscript. And man, I got to tell you, I was like a dog getting pet for the first time. I was like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. But it was because I earned it. It wasn't, it wasn't somebody that the first time they picked up the draft, they're like, oh, amazing writer, the next whoever, John Grisham, Stephen King, Dan Brown, whatever. No, he was like, you need work, bro. And I did work, and I have worked, and I continue to work. I study the craft. I listen to audiobooks, podcasts, read whatever I can, read other authors. And in between all of that, continue to work on the novel. And, the last tip I have for you is for you Game of Thrones fans, learn to think like a Lannister. Remember the Lannisters, they just tried to kill everybody, right? You need to be that way with your novel as well. You're going to do things, you're going to write things. It may take you hours, days, weeks, months, many months to create and craft a subplot that you just fall in love with and characters that you fall in love with. But they may not be right for the book. And you're going to hear from your editor maybe like, you need to flesh this out better, or this person's confusing. And you literally go in and kill things you love. And you have to be prepared to lop heads off. Further, when you get to the stage of talking to agents, get prepared for your own beheading. I'll tell you, my manuscript is not finished, and you're never supposed to see an agent and pitch an agent before your manuscript's done. And I knew that, but I wanted to pitch them for the experience, for the learning experience, right? So I come in, hang on, I'm going to show you this. I come in loud and proud with my novel, Maitreya, 165,000 page thriller, or no, 165,000 word thriller. Sit down with the agent, I'm like, here's my pitch, blah, blah, blah. And here's my finished product. She goes, how many words? I said, 165,000. And she said, you obviously didn't do your research. Nobody's going to look at you or publish you if you're over 80,000 words. And I'm like, and then like Joffrey Lannister ordered Ned Stark, chopped my head off. And so I went to the restroom, sewed my head back on just in time for the next meeting, sat down, blah, blah, blah pitch, blah, blah, blah length. Off came my head again. I didn't even bother attaching my head for the third meeting. I just tucked it under my, in here like a football, sat down and said, 165,000 word thriller. And then I began to kill things I loved. And the reality is, even though we love these little tangents we go off on, sometimes they're not as beautiful to readers as they are to us. And having to pare yourself down to a set word limit really disciplines you to get to the important points of your story. Don't be afraid of it. It's a good experience. Not an easy one, but a good one. Hey, so that's all I got for you today. I want to thank you for tuning in. I hope this was enjoyable. I certainly had fun. If you have any questions, type it in on the comment line. Feel free to email me, author.phil@philipmacko.com. And thanks again for tuning in.